a while back. So there was a book called Controversial Therapies for Autism and Intellectual Disabilities. I don't know why the gap is there, but and I was asked to write a sort of an introductory chapter based on my background in superstition, and I also had that work background in autism, right? So I wrote the opening chapter, which was "Where do fads come from?" And much of what I'm going to say now is based on that, with some newer ideas as well. Okay, so I'm going to go through several factors that I think are prevalent or are present in the case of autism that create an environment for fad therapies, for unsupported, unscientific approaches to this problem. And so here is the first one, which is that the best available treatment is not completely effective, right? It does not cure it. There isn't a real cure. And so this has been true it's currently true for colds, of course, but also in the early days when HIV and AIDS in the 90s was going on and there was no treatment for it, there were all sorts of pseudoscientific things that people were doing to fill that gap. And it didn't fill the gap, but it was the right environment for that. And now they're all gone. No one bothers with those things anymore. They're all forgotten because there's a very effective treatment now for this condition. So when it comes to as those of you who know this literature already are aware, when it comes to autism, the best therapy known is applied behavior analysis. Yay for us. But it only is about, as far as bringing people up to actual typical functioning, it's only about 47%, according to the original Vyse study. Right, only 47% of his participants got up to typical functioning level, right? And everyone improved, but large numbers of them did not improve to that to be sort of free of the disorder. And so here's that gap that we're talking about that makes pseudoscience, makes a home for pseudoscience. Okay, so this is another aspect of the problem, which is that the best treatment is a pain. It's hard, and it takes many hours. I don't know if you're familiar with what's involved with this, but applied behavior analysis is supposed to be done 40 hours a week. That's the prescribed level, 40 hours a week of one-on-one instruction, very rigorous. As behaviorists are, very orderly kinds of treatment, and so it's difficult. And it is true. I have being aware of the people who use facilitated communication and other odd therapies for their children. Many of them first tried behavior analysis and found it too difficult. They couldn't, and then they just gave up and went somewhere else because it was easier. So, and in this article, I make the comparison to, and this will bring this home to you because I understand that homeopathy is quite popular here. But I make the comparison to the 19th century to what was standard medicine at that time. Was something called heroic medicine, and that's a good name for it because you had to be a hero to go through it. I mean, it was brutal. I mean, the most in the United States and Europe, the most common treatment for any kind of ailment you had was bloodletting, was to get blood out of you. And so this lovely little instrument here with the knives on it was for cutting the skin and letting blood come out and bleeding a patient. And this is leeches in that vial there. And they used other kinds of purgatives that would make people vomit or get diarrhea or have fevers. It was harsh. And so homeopathy came along and was much more palatable. It was easy, you know, and so it was a success. I mean, at least it had the benefit of not killing the patient, right? Which is what these things did. You know, George Washington had bloodletting on his deathbed and probably died sooner because of it. So okay, let's see what we got here. Okay, so this is if this is going to work. This is a video that shows one of the therapies that was used, which I'm sure you probably have heard of, which is cupping. So let's see if I can get it to work. Aha. You know what I might have to do is...
An immediate purge.
It's working.
It needs blistering. Blistering on the back to draw the humours from the brain, blistering on the legs to draw the humours to the lower extremities.
I agree, but he'll never submit.
Hello there, Georgie boy.
Not my skin. Not my skin, please. Oh, for pity's sake. I'm the Lord's anointed. Oh God, unto whom all hearts be open, all desires known, and from whom no secrets are hid. It's by the inspiration of thy Holy Spirit, that we may perfectly love thee and worthily magnify thy holy name. Through Christ our Lord. Almighty, most merciful Father, do we ever err and stray from thy ways like lost sheep? We follow too much into thy sins. Have mercy upon us.
Okay, so that's it. How many have seen something like this before? Or this is they do it differently now, but it is still done today, and it's part of Chinese medicine, traditional medicine, as well as has this history. But so this is King George. This is from the movie The Madness of King George, which was it's a funny movie. About King George of England, and this is the same George that was king when the United States had its revolution, and he was, had some disorder or something. Yes. This is painful. Very painful. Yes. I mean, they take the glass, they heat it up. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you for reminding me. They take the glass, they heat it up. And the idea being that you put it on the skin, which is painful, and then it cools and creates a vacuum and supposedly pulls something out. All of these old heroic medicine treatments were based on the basic, Greek idea of four humors, right? And you heard the man saying, to move the humors this way, and so this was the primitive idea that they had about how medicine worked. And so, yes, very painful. And so homeopathy would be a dream compared to this, right? I mean, why not? I would choose it too. So anyway, but the sad part, of course, is I'm going to do it this way, right? Okay. No? Oh. There may be a delay. Yeah, maybe I'll walk over here, and if I'm still in the picture. So, yes, do you recognize this picture? This is from the Rio Olympics, and Mark Phelps, and he has the welts all over him. The swimmers, you could see them on the swimmers. There probably were other athletes that did it too. And so this is a tragic circumstance. Not only is it unsightly, but there's nothing to back this up. It is pseudoscience, and so it's a shame. But okay, so yes. Sure.
I have some experience with sports, and I think that in some cases, for some athletes, in some cases, hi. Oh, I think now it's working.
Yeah.
In some cases, with some athletes, it's not only the pseudoscience what it does according to the papers or to the research, but what it does to their minds, making
Yes.
them feel relaxed, making them taking the focus out of the competition and
Yes.
going to the, now it's not so painful as was in the past. Now we use pistols
Uh-huh. To make a
create
vacuum. Right.
Yeah, and I can tell you, this is really used in physical therapy here in Brazil.
Mhm.
And of course, in some cases, like low back pain,
Right.
but low back pain related to muscle tightness,
Uh-huh.
not low back pain related to a disc herniation.
Right.
Okay, so it's very specific and it's very hard. And sometimes I completely agree. We have many, many, many other things that are much more scientifically
Yes.
proven, but understanding the mind of an athlete
Sure.
is quite impossible.
No, I would grant that, definitely. That's likely to be the case. I just think that there probably are better ways to focus your mind for competition that don't, make big black welts on your skin, But to each his own, right? I mean, there probably is no permanent harm from this, so I guess there's that, right? But I wouldn't do it if I were. Okay, so so in the case of autism, as I said before, the standard treatment is really difficult too. Like it starts, you have to start it very early, 2 to 3 years old, 40 hours a week. Much of it in the home, which means it's very intrusive for the parents, and it's expensive. It's very expensive. So for all those reasons, it opens the door for people to make a different choice, to want to choose some other approach. So, okay, let's see. This old-fashioned method may work best with the slides. Okay, so here, another explanation that I think is at play in the development of pseudoscience or other kinds of unscientific treatments is a sort of theoretical basis that makes sense for people, right? It may not be a very good one, but it makes sense to them anyway. And so you can think of Hahnemann's theory for homeopathy. It had the first principle may have a sort of logic to it. The idea that like cures like, right? That if you have a substance that creates the same symptom in a healthy person as the disease creates, then maybe that substance would be useful in treating the disease in some kind of reverse psychology sort of way. I can see why that might make a kind of sense to people. Of course, the second principle, I don't know. I can't, the idea of dilution, complete dilution, that I can't get that to work for me as being a good principle, but it somehow it has been sold as a. I mean, there is a simple theoretical basis that you can tell people about, and they will nod their heads and say, okay, let's give it a try. And of course, the fact that homeopathy is not painful in any way is, it is essentially placebos, right, that are being given to people. So. The other, I get the diet example, right, will make sense to people because there are, in fact, certain metabolic disorders that are, that are related to diet. So diabetes, it can be controlled by diet, right, and we all know about that. That's very common. And then there's this thing called PKU, I don't know whether you've heard of this or not, Phenyl Ketonuria, I think is the full name, but it's an interesting thing in that it's a genetic disorder in which certain people cannot metabolize a certain substance that's common in food, and as a result that it can result in brain damage. And so the state institutions for many years were filled with people who we didn't know had this disorder. It's now tested for routinely in the United States, at least, I assume here as well, and then people can go on the diet restrict their diet and avoid that outcome. So these kinds of real disorders might, give some credence to the idea that autism too might be a diet-related thing. So some of the alternative therapies that have been promoted for autism certainly play into this or take advantage of this aspect. Oh, we have another video. How many people have heard of Therapeutic Touch before? Is that you have? Okay, good. So. I don't know whether we're on our second or third idea, but another point is that the alternative therapy is actually promoted by a professional group. They've adopted it as their own, and they are promoting it. It becomes part of their identity, and so this is true for a number of the things that I listed on the board before. As far as alternative treatments for autism, but therapeutic touch is a treatment for any number of things that might ail you that is promoted by nurses. And the funny thing is that it's like laying on of hands, almost like a religious laying on of hands, except that therapeutic touch actually doesn't involve touching. The hand, as you'll see, this is a nice little introduction to it here in the video that it shows exactly how it works, and there's no touching at all in therapeutic touch. So let's take a look.
My name is Jackie Kern. I'm a registered nurse and a Therapeutic Touch practitioner. Therapeutic touch is a healing modality developed in the 1970s by nurse researcher Dolores Krieger and natural healer Dora Coons. It's a contemporary interpretation of ancient healing practices in which the energy of a healer's hands is used to promote healing in another. Therapeutic touch is based on several assumptions. First, that energy fields surround all living things and that the human energy field goes beyond skin boundaries. That the healthy human energy field is naturally symmetrical and balanced, and that unbalanced energy fields are associated with illness and illness symptoms. Therapeutic touch assumes that human energy fields can be transformed, and that unbalanced energy fields can be rebalanced, and thus health can be promoted. This is done through intentionally directed energy exchange between a healer's hands and the client's energy field. It is not invasive, and no untoward effects have been documented. Okay, Dara, I'm going to start therapeutic touch. Are you comfortable? Mm-hmm. Okay. To begin a therapeutic touch treatment, I quiet my thoughts and focus on my intent to support the client's healing. I'm going to run my hands through your energy field. Holding my hands a few inches away from the client, I move my hands from head to feet in a smooth and symmetrical manner. I assess the energy field through an awareness of differences in sensory cues on the palms of my hands. I may sense areas of warmth or coolness, or heaviness or tingling, or some other sensation. After an initial assessment, I continue to move my hands from the midline outwards in a rhythmical and symmetrical manner from head to feet. This clears and balances her energy field. At the extremities, my hands follow the long bones. In areas where I sense energy disturbances, I intentionally direct energy rebalancing. I'm actually feeling a little bit of congested energy right at the top of your back. I may simply let my hands linger a little longer over an area, or I may identify a need for more energy movement and sweep through the energy field a few more times. It's through sensory and intuitive cues that I adjust my hand movements and my intentions. A treatment can last anywhere from 2 or 3 minutes to 10 or more. The client can be seated in a chair or lying down. Toward the end of a treatment, I reevaluate the energy field with a final head-to-feet assessment. Client feels very relaxed. She rests a few minutes, acknowledging the energy changes before moving on to her other activities. In multiple studies, therapeutic touch has been documented to be effective in reducing pain and anxiety and promoting relaxation, all of which facilitate natural healing processes.
She seems like such a nice lady. Doesn't she? I would want to spend some time with her. But sorry, yes, I'm out of the frame. Yes. She said effects on pain. She said multiple controlled studies have shown effects on pain, and I don't know whether she specified what the other disorders were, so this was invented by a nurse, an academic nurse, and has been promoted primarily by the nursing profession. There are, of course, nurses who don't believe in it, and there are doctors. Yes, yes, exactly. There are doctors who don't believe in it as well. So I wanted to point out the connection here to, this is not the first time that some kind of thing with the hands has been promoted. Franz Mesmer, back in the 18th, 19th century, early 19th century, had a whole practice in France where mesmerism and primarily wealthy women went to him and would go into trances, and he used this idea of animal magnetism, that instead of the energy field concept, his was animal magnetism, and instead of coming from the patient to the therapist, it was the other direction. But you can see this woman sort of going into a trance as the dominant therapist does his thing. Now, how many people know about this? Yes, I mean, skeptics in the audience are going to know about it, So this is a very, very famous study that completely debunked therapeutic touch, right? And there's a lesson to be learned here. But the girl on the right is Emily Rosa. She's the youngest person to ever publish a study in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And she did this famous experiment. It was part of a 4th grade science fair project. And she was guided by her mother, who is a nurse, by the way, and so she set up a very simple experiment. She first recruited practitioners of therapeutic touch, and she made a little cardboard, divider with 2 holes in it, she sort of narrowed it down to the basic thing: can these people actually feel the energy field, right? So the therapist sat behind the cardboard thing with both hands out. Emily, in her very scientific way, would flip a coin to decide which hand she was going to put her hand over. She would flip the coin, write it down in her little book, put her hand over the right or left, and then ask the therapist, where is my hand, right? Where do you feel the energy fields? And you can see how she did it there, right, in the drawing. And the results were bad. They actually, it's a 50-50 chance, right? And they actually identified slightly less than half of the times, about 48% or something, I forget. And so her study was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And so it really does sort of make a problem for the therapeutic touch field. But this study was published in 1998, right? The video I just showed you is from 2016. So you can see that despite this sort of crushing blow for therapeutic touch, it continues in part, I think, because it is promoted by a trusted group of professionals, right? They have adopted it as their thing that they do, and we think highly of nurses, and so people go along with it and adopt it. So there's a lesson about the ineffectiveness of debunking, that it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go away just because we've published a devastating, article about it. Okay, and so here are a couple of other examples in autism. So this is the one on the left. There is the sensory integration approach, and I mentioned that this was the one where they brush the skin, they swing people in swings and so forth, and as is going on with this kid here. And there's a discipline, and I don't know whether they have it here in Brazil or not, but there's a discipline called Occupational Therapy. They do, okay. And it is common in state hospitals and in schools for children with disabilities and adults as well. And this is a therapy that they, as a group, have adopted. You are familiar with it, yeah. And then the vision thing is something that naturally, ophthalmologists have done. And so this is a website that talks about autism vision therapy with prism glasses and things. So I know it's just, but again, a trusted professional group. And so it's going to, and again, in a circumstance where people want to try something that will be quick and easy, I just put these glasses on my son and he's better, this can happen. I have no idea if there's any data at all to support that in terms of publications for prism glasses. I will show you later some data that doesn't support it at all, but anyway. Okay, so, and in the most recent version of this chapter, the book was revised, I think, a couple of years ago, this one on where do fads come from. I mentioned this issue too, which is very current now, right? We are living in an era where science is under attack, certainly in my country, and my understanding is here as well. And so, as a result, it's as though everyone's ideas are equal. There are no people who have better ideas than anyone else, right? Experts are just people, and I'm an expert too because I'm me, right? So Jenny McCarthy is an actress who is probably more than any one person in the world responsible for the vaccine, the anti-vax movement, because she had an autistic child. She believed that the autism started after the child was vaccinated, and she went on a big tour and wrote about it and talked about it, and that's when the movement really got going. It was started because of this, this article, the study that has later, subsequently, the Wakefield Study. Have any of you heard of this? There was a study by a physician in England that claimed to show a relationship between the two. Very small sample, but it was published in Lancet, which is a respected medical journal. But it was later retracted because it turned out that he falsified the data. He did not reveal his own biases in the presentation of the data, and the article was retracted, and he was ultimately lost his license to practice medicine in England because of it. So he received the most severe punishment you can get for that. But he didn't go to jail. But nonetheless, he got it going. And it, just as in the case of the debunking of Therapeutic Touch, the fact that there is no data, and there have been many subsequent studies that were much better, that show no relationship between vaccination and autism. So it doesn't mean that people have given up that idea at all, as you know. So we live in this era as well, and that's got to be an important factor in why this goes on. Okay, so what all of this has resulted in the United States is a large problem in the field of autism with respect to this in particular, facilitated communication. So I'm going to ask again, how many people are familiar with facilitated communication? A few. Okay, so I will have to explain it. But it was introduced in the 1990s in Australia. and it came to the United States in a big way in the early 90s. The basic principle of it is that you can direct me. The basic principle of it is that the problem with autistic people who have autism, is not an intellectual one, it's a physical one. They're in there, they have a brain, they're intelligent, but they can't make their bodies work properly. And so they, yes, a good mind in a broken body, right? And so the idea is that they can communicate, they can speak, they could speak, and they certainly can write, as long as someone holds their hand, right? So that it's literally like if I were to take your arm and you're the person and I'm your facilitator, I'm the person who helps you, and I get you to type like this on a board. And I believe what's happening is I'm merely steadying Marco's hand. His hand, he knows what he wants to do, but his hand is just not able to do it, so I'm just steadying it. I'm not directing it at all. And so you have a problem, right? A scientific problem. There are two possible causes for what's happening, but in an amazing way, which I will get into more in the talk. People really did believe that they were not doing the typing for the person, that the person was doing the typing. And I think that was a genuine. I mean, that's a hard thing to accept. But I think there's good reason to believe that none of these people, or very few of them, were lying, right? They really believed that they were merely steadying the hand and not typing for the person. Yes? It's exactly like on a Ouija board, where the point of having two people on the planchette, it's called, is that it makes it ambiguous as to, you know. Exactly, yes. And so it's a well-known phenomenon in psychology. And so the problem is that early on in the experience of this therapy, and I have videos to show you, and you'll be amazed by it, I promise. But the problem was that early on in the use of this therapy, suddenly there were cases where what was being typed out on the board were accusations of sexual abuse by parents or by other people. And suddenly the stakes got much higher, and we needed to find out who was doing the typing in those cases, because it was, and I have a video that will show that. And it led to court cases. Obviously, people went to court, and now science had to be applied to figure this out. And so I think that's where we are now. Okay, so this is a little video that will explain. This is from a very famous PBS Frontline television show, which was put out in 1993, very early in this whole phenomenon. I used it in my introductory psychology classes for years as an example of science in a very simple way being applied very clearly. Okay, ready?
This is what happened last January to a family in southern Maine. Betsy Wheaton, a 17-year-old autistic girl, began using FC at school in 1992. One day, using a letterboard, Betsy and her facilitator wrote that everybody in her family, her father, mother, grandparents, and brother, were sexually abusing her. Betsy and her brother were immediately put in foster care while the case was investigated. The court appointed a local attorney, Phil Worden, as Betsy's legal guardian. Worden realized that this was more difficult than the usual abuse case, Before considering whether the allegations were true, the court had to decide a more fundamental question. Was Betsy the author of the allegations, or had they come from her facilitator?
I was most worried in my heart about were we going to do justice in this case. If the communications were real and she was being abused, the idea that on a legal technicality we might send the children back would be just absolutely horrible. On the other hand, if these were not real communications, the idea that all this would happen to these family and these children on a bogus idea was also unacceptable. So to my mind, the stakes were extremely high on both sides, and it was very important that we reach a quality decision based on the truth. And so what I was looking for was a clean, simple, and fairly quick way to just solve that one narrow question. Were these communications coming from the children?
All the parties agreed to invite an expert in communication to come and assess Betsy. They chose Dr. Howard Shane from the Boston Children's Hospital.
This is Dr. Shane. How are you? Nice to meet you.
Okay, folks, what I'm going to be doing now...
Shane had devised a double-blind test like this to objectively determine who was authoring the messages, Betsy or the facilitator who transcribed the allegations. He showed both a series of pictures and asked them to type what they saw.
Betsy, sure you're looking at
When both Betsy and her facilitator saw a picture of a key, the letters K-E-Y were typed. But Shane wanted to discover what happened if each saw a different picture.
Okay.
When Betsy saw a cup, she didn't type cup, she typed hat, what the facilitator saw.
Here we go. I'll take a look at this one. I want you to tell me what you see. Okay?
When Betsy was shown a picture of a dog, she didn't type dog, but sneakers, what the facilitator saw.
Okay. Okay. Want to take a look at that one?
When Betsy was shown a boat,
Now you,
she didn't
Betsy,
type
you take a
boat,
look at that one.
but sandwich, what the facilitator saw.
Okay, here's the next one.
It was just devastating to watch because what you saw was the words being typed out were the words the facilitator had seen. And it was just so clear and so unmistakable. I was sitting there watching this and saying, my God, it's really true. This stuff is bogus.
What I found was that whenever the pictures were different, I always received the typed message that was seen by the facilitator. So that was pretty strong evidence that not only was Betsy not communicating, but the messages were being absolutely, totally directed and authored by the facilitator. Come on, Betsy.
Shane then tried a message passing test. He took Betsy out into the corridor and showed her an object out of sight of her facilitator.
Come on. Betsy, now I'm going to show you something. Take a look at this. You take this. Now, what is that? Give it back to me. We're going to back in. I want you to tell everybody what I showed you. When we went back into the room, she was unable to type the word key. I then took another key out of my pocket and said, with the facilitator present, what is this? And she immediately typed key. So again, it suggests that when the facilitator is aware of the information, we get the answer. But when the facilitator is unaware of the information, we don't get an answer.
The only logical conclusion of the test was that the terrible accusations had been authored not by Betsy, but by her facilitator. The Wheatons are now reunited. The facilitator, devastated by the test results, stopped using facilitated communication and persuaded Betsy's school to stop using it as well.
Okay. So that's a clear demonstration of how it was tested, and what you should know that this is a fabulous movie. Again, it was great for intro psych because I could teach people how science works in simple ways, and it also was a very compelling story. There is another in this same video. By the way, the whole video is available on YouTube now. Anybody should be able to get to it, and it's called Prisoners of Silence. But there were places in the United States where an entire institution, a state institution, was using this facilitated communication on their clients. There's one famous case that's also described in this video of the Odie Heck developmental center in New York, which is subsequently closed. But the whole staff was using it, but they had behavior analysts working there, and they became suspicious of this technique, and they set up a very famous double-blind, setup like this. They used a table with a divider where they could show things separately to the facilitator and the client without the other seeing through the divider to the other picture. And they used the facilitators who were most comfortable with each client, the ones that had worked with them the most under the best possible circumstances. They did hundreds of trials with different clients, and they had some trials where the pictures were the same and some where they were different. And under hundreds of possible trials where the pictures were different, not a single correct response was made. And what was interesting was that in that case in the movie, they have interviews with the staff members who were doing it with them. And it was a traumatic experience for them. They could not believe it. They in fact, they had gone along with the test because they thought it would validate what they were doing, and they were wanting to do that. And they were devastated. It was very. I mean, there was one woman in the movie who said, "I couldn't talk about it for several months without crying because it was so upsetting to know that it had been false." So that was in 1993. This movie was widely shown. There were lots and lots of studies, empirical studies, that showed that facilitated communication did not work. Many published studies. So facilitated communication must be gone now, right? I thought it was. I thought as a psychologist I had known about this back when this happened. I watched this show when it first came out, and I said, oh, well, that problem solved. We can move on to other things, right? No. So by the way, here is a real demonstration of what it looks like. And I won't say anything more about it, but this is a group of parents who have gotten together in Indiana, and they all have children that use facilitated communication. This is sort of like a little gab fest where they are all just chatting with each other, And what I want you to do is to watch very closely the clients or the children who are supposedly the speakers in these cases, and watch their heads while they're typing. Okay, it's a short clip.
Look, okay, you can be an honorary autistic nerd.
What?
What did he say? Okay, you can be an honorary autistic nerd.
All right, what do you think about it?
Take that.
What do you think about other people? They're all typing, see? It's not just you in your own house. They're all doing it. What do you think of that? Oh, finish.
We can have our own mini center here.
Absolutely. Tell me what you want to tell me.
Seth Matthew, did you read it? He says, but we still want others to believe, so they will spread the word.
I think they're debating. There's a debate going on. That's
Whoa!
That's all about saving the world.
I love it.
John, what are you saying, dude?
I want to thank everyone for coming.
Oh.
Yeah, it'll come through on pretty. Hey, wait a minute. And Seth's talking, John.
That was F.
Seth and Lindsay are talking. And Jake.
I don't know what that means.
How do you catch it? Let me get this.
Oh, I think it goes away. I don't know what that meant.
Okay, I think that's probably enough. So what do you notice about the children when they're doing this? They weren't looking at the keyboard. Often they weren't. Some of them seemed to be, much of the time, but they weren't. And yet the facilitator is looking intently at the keyboard, right? So it's unless you assume that they are, you know, somehow blind touch typists, which they appear, in which case they probably wouldn't need assistance, right? They wouldn't need a facilitator. Then they can't, and somehow that escapes the practitioners. Now, what I want to say, to be fair, is these are the parents of these kids, and they, you know, having an autistic child is not an easy thing, right? And so they are dealing with that gap that I talked about at the beginning, the treatment gap. They're trying to make their child as normal as possible, and even especially these are all facilitated communication is particularly popular naturally with people who don't have speech, right? They don't have any verbal ability that is able to communicate language, and so suddenly they do with facilitated communication. Autistic children and adults who have some language ability typically don't use this. They develop that as well as they can. So I can understand the impulse on the part of the parents, and I feel for them, but it's amazing the level of inability to see what's going on. Yes? Yeah, exactly. The answer that is given for that. I mean, you get children who, on their first, you know, couple of months of facilitated communication, they're writing poetry and they're writing very sophisticated things. The explanation that's given is, remember, it's a clear mind inside there. It's just the body. And so they've been looking at television and they've been seeing things around them, and they've learned just through osmosis. Well, I mean, typical children don't learn that way. They have to be deliberately taught. So that too kind of strains credulity. Isn't likely to be true. But that's what they believe. That's what they believe. And of course, people who use facilitators, there are examples in the United States of people who have used facilitators who have gone to college. They go through, they take their facilitators into high school, they graduate from high school. In some cases, there's one recently that gave a valedictorian address at the graduation ceremony, you know, using a keyboard that had been pre-recorded with his speech. And others have gone on and graduated from college with facilitators, and they were allowed to do that and so forth. And you know, so it's an interesting phenomenon. What I should point out is that last video. So remember, the debunking happened in 1993, right? That last video I showed you was from something like 2013 or something. It's recent. So the answer is facilitated communication, like therapeutic touch, has not gone away. It's still there. And this is another video, and this is to me is shameful, but this video was put together by the Washington Post newspaper, which is a very well-respected newspaper in the United States. But this is showing, it's an example for you of the newest version of facilitated communication. It's not exactly the same. It's one where the person who's allegedly communicating points with their own finger, right, and their hand is not being held. But they point at a board, which you see there, which is held by someone else in the air, right? Now, you know, we ask the question, why can't you just put that board down on the table and let the person do it? And that's a very good question. But here's an example of how it works.
Let's try and calm your body. I am in A space C O N S T A N T space. I'm in a constant B A T T T T L E. You got it. You're gonna rock it again. You're gonna rock it again. W I T H with, get it, M Y space B O D Y. I'm in a constant battle with my body.
Okay, he's in a constant battle with his body. So what are your comments about this? Do you think this is better? You believe this one where you don't believe the other? Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's still the case. It's a board in the air, with another person on it. And also, and this is true of both techniques, is that whatever the person is supposed to have said is reported out by another person, right? So if there are errors in this, and sometimes they're typing very quickly, then the person can sort of fill in the blanks. We don't have a permanent record of what's going on. And so all these situations are cases in which errors can develop or whatever. And the other thing is that this is what you're seeing here with this young man. By the way, he showed very classic autistic symptoms, clapping hands and rocking and biting himself and so forth. But they've been working together for a long time, right? He's obviously learned some of the routine of what he's supposed to do, and it's not, to me, it's not credible that he's actually communicating, but they've developed a little dance that they do together. And so this is called rapid prompting method. It was invented in India by a woman who is the primary progenitor of it. I've forgotten her name, but and she brought it to the United States. People brought her here. She now has an institute and does it. And the unfortunate part is that the promoters of RPM have learned the lesson. They have not submitted to any scientific tests at all. They do not agree to do it, and in some cases they've been very aggressive about avoiding it. We don't need that. They simply say we know it works. We don't need that. We know. We just know, right? And in today's world, that's gonna work for a lot of people. That will be acceptable. That's fine. And of course, the bias is for it to work. People want a good outcome and for it to be the case. So this is the latest problem, and it's very popular and it's spreading. It's getting bigger. Now. Just to go a little bit further, it is the case that for facilitated communication, there's something like 19 or 20 professional organizations throughout the world that have put out statements saying that this is false and we do not support it and so forth. So there is the professional sort of organization stamp of disapproval, right? Stamp of disapproval. And in the case of rapid prompting method, because it hasn't been submitted to a test, but it also looks so much like facilitated communication, at least in the case of the American Speech and Language Hearing Association, very recently they put out a statement saying, you should not believe that what's being typed out is actually the voice of the person. And so it would be better if there were studies showing it, because then it would be obvious. But because it's becoming so popular and it hasn't been tested, they felt that it was important to make the statement. And I believe that there will be other organizations who will follow their lead and do it. But so the professional organizations are fairly clear that neither of these techniques should be used. But here's a case that is very recent. This is March of 2018, and I'm not showing the man's face on purpose. But this man who lived in the Miami area, not actually Miami, but he lived in the Miami area, his son was being taught with facilitated communication and it was facilitated communication, it wasn't RPM, in his school, and the teacher typed out some sexual abuse things. This man ended up being arrested, taken out of his home, and held in jail for something like 6 months. I assume he lost his job, and eventually he was released because finally the authorities realized that this was not true, that there was not enough evidence they didn't do a test in the same way, but they consulted the literature. But in the meantime, the guy was in jail, away from his family. This is just recently because of it. And so it is worrisome. Obviously, when someone when there are charges of sexual abuse, you can't just ignore it. You have to look into it. You can't just say, oh, that's not true, and so it is a high stakes situation, but it's a shame that this guy's life, and I don't know for certain, but I believe he lost his job as a result of being in jail. How many jobs would wait 6 months for you to come back? So it's a real problem. It continues. Yes.
If the facilitator is writing this message, even if this person doesn't believe it's themselves, it could be something that they themselves have noticed and are typing,
The facilitator has noticed?
have noticed something about sexual harassment or
oh,
something,
right.
And they are typing even if they don't believe this.
Right.
You would have to look it out even so.
Yes, you do. And it is strange, admittedly, and I will provide an explanation in a minute, but in fact I can do it very soon. But it is strange that there would be all these accusations of sexual abuse. Like, where is that coming from, right? And why would that be the case? Well, part of the answer comes from this article. So this is an article by Janice Boynton, who was the actual facilitator in that case with Betsy. Remember the video with Betsy? So in the movie that you watched, that wasn't Janice doing it. I think it was her mother. There was a recreation for the movie of what had actually happened. But Janice was the facilitator for this child, and she was devastated when she saw the result. She immediately knew something was wrong when that testing went on with Howard Shane, and she was another person who just was horrified. And so she ultimately, it took her a long time to sort of pull herself back together, but she wrote if someone suggested that she write an article about her experience, and she did, and it's a wonderful article, and it has a partial explanation for why these things might happen, and it is that in her case, Betsy came to school, and remember that Betsy had no language at all, right? Typical language. And she came to school one day and was really misbehaving in a very strange, unexplained way. And if you're working with children, as I have done and maybe some of you have, in a situation like that, you try to think about what could be the explanation. Why is she behaving so strangely today, right? And of course, there are many possibilities that we don't know about. She might have some pain that she can't express. Who knows? But what for whatever reason, unconsciously, Janice came up with the idea that something bad was happening at home, right? And it needn't have been this, but that's what it was. And so she provided an explanation for why Betsy was behaving as she was at the time. And so it's that I can understand how that might happen in other cases too. And so that was just writing that in this article and providing that partial explanation was a very valuable thing that she did in this thing. But and by the way, tell me if we should take a break at some point. But this is Janice today. She was a speech therapist working with this child at the time of that incident way back in the 90s. She now has dropped out of that profession and is an artist living in Maine in the United States. But she also was so moved by her experience that she has become the sort of informal leader of a group of us that are fighting to get rid of facilitated communication. And she's a kind of amazing person. And she's going to be speaking at SciCon in October, which is a big conference of skeptics in the United States. And I'm going to introduce her because I wrote an article about her based on her article and her experiences. I interviewed her. And she's a delightful person and a very deeply moral person who is trying very hard to get rid of facilitated communication and RPM as she goes on. So I wrote An Artist with a Science-Based Mission. Okay, so why is it still around? I ask, do any of you have children? If you care about, as again I mentioned earlier, having an autistic child, I mean, there's nothing about which we have more expectation, I don't think, than the birth of a child, right? The parents look forward to this event with great expectation, and then having a child who not only has autism but can't say your name, can't say I love you, can't communicate at all. And in the case of the non-speaking cases like this, the very severe cases of autism, the prognosis is not great. Even with the best therapies, we can get them to do some sign language, we can get them to do basic things, but you're not going to get very far with that. So in that case, the idea of trading an intellectual disorder for a physical one and getting in return a child who can speak to you, so they think, that's going to make it very attractive. So this is also an aspect of the problem. Anybody heard of this neurodiversity movement? Hasn't gotten here yet? Maybe? You have heard of it? There is a group. So first of all, as you know, I keep going the wrong way. I'm trying not to block the screen for people, but as you know, autism now is a spectrum, right? That goes all the way from mild forms of Asperger's all the way to the other end, like the children we have here. And so you have this unified group, some of whom are fairly high functioning and have been to school and so on, but they have Asperger's-like symptoms, and they're now seeing themselves as a social group, wanting to claim the autism identity. For many years as a practitioner, I was told, we always say person with autism, right? Because they were a person first, and then they had a disorder. We didn't want them to be their disorder. That seemed like the most kind and moral thing to do. But these people have reversed that. They want to be called autistics, we autistics, and they want to have it as an identity like some other, minority group. And so the problem is that they're, by redefining themselves as a minority group fighting for their rights, right, as a minority, one of the rights that they are fighting for is the right to communication, to the method of communication that works best for us, right? And that means, in some cases, facilitated communication. So this, let's see, but this book, by the way, was a bestseller that sort of explained the whole thing of the tribe of autistics and neurodiversity. But this is a statement, and a little bit hard to see, but this is a statement by this group, the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, ASAN, and it says, many therapies and products for autistic children and adults are helpful and should be made more widely available, such as physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, augmentative and assistive communication technology, including supportive typing, which, by the way, that's a synonym for facilitated communication. Facilitated communication and other methodologies that support communication access. So they are making a bold statement that we support the use of facilitated communication. And also, in the process, there's a backlash against behavioral therapies. It says, however, ASN opposes the use of behavioral programs that focus on normalization rather than teaching useful skills. I mean, I think that the basic idea that people are diverse, right? People come in all sorts of flavors and different, behavioral patterns. I have no problem with that. To me, I think we should be open to different ways of living and so forth. But how far you go with that can be a problem. And what you have, I think, in this situation is a lot of higher functioning, speaking autistic people speaking for the ones who can't, right? And taking their voices away. So so many good points that I would agree with, I think many of us would agree with, but bad implications for non-speaking autistic people. And I would say everyone is lining up to speak for rather than honor the people as they are. And so that is a problem. Okay. Oh yes, this is the last bit on this facilitated communication, and I have a personal investment in this. So, 1 year ago, at about this time, an article appeared posted online for Behavioral and Brain Sciences. Anybody familiar with this journal? It's a very well-respected journal. They publish long articles by an individual, or a target article, and then many commentaries follow that, and then a reply from the other. So it has that format to it. And if you get your article published in this journal, it's a very big and good thing, right? Lots of famous people, including B.F. Skinner, early on, have written articles in this journal. Many famous psychologists. So this article appeared a year ago. Being versus appearing socially uninterested, challenging assumptions about social motivation in autism, by those two people. So this is part of that neurodiversity movement. The idea being, what they're doing in this article, they're arguing that autistic people are not, withdrawn, socially withdrawn. They just prefer that. It's not that they're incapable of social functioning, proper social functioning. They just don't like it. It's a preference. So that's what they're arguing in this article, which is fine. I don't know. I don't think I agree with that. But that's there's nothing wrong with making that case. My understanding is that the first author has a child who is autistic, and he's a developmental psychologist at the University of Virginia, a very fine university, and that worries me when I tell you the rest of the story. But they make that argument, and the argument is based entirely on qualitative research for the most part, and they included in the article quotes from people with autism. Okay. So I was sitting at home one day on a Saturday night with nowhere to go, and a tweet comes across my screen, and it's from this journal, and it says, if you want to be a commenter on this article, you better get it in by Monday, because that's the deadline, right? And I have done one previous commentary on an article many years ago, so I get these tweets and emails about this. So I saw it and I caught the title and I said, well, I better look at this article. And I mean, here I am alone on a Saturday night. I'm doing this. I start reading the article and I start to notice two things. One, they've given the actual names of the people they quote in the article. Right, which is fine, I guess. These are public quotes, so they can do that. So they were from published sources. They gave the names, but I also recognize some of the names as famous users of FC. So they were using as data for their article statements derived from facilitated communication, and furthermore, they had not said that. They had not acknowledged to the audience that these quotes are from people who aren't actually speaking, right? They're from their facilitators. And they had not acknowledged it. They had other quotes that were from speaking autistic people, right? And that's fine, right? But they hadn't. So I noticed this, and so I got all upset, and I actually emailed the editor, whom I know vaguely, and said, "Look, do you know that this is like?" I said, "What would you think? What would you think if there was an? I mean, just as an example, I said, what would you think if there was an article that was designed to quote African Americans and talk about the lives and preferences of African Americans, and they had quotes in that article, and it was discovered later that half of those quotes were actually from white people, right, and were not African Americans at all. How would you react to that? What would you do with such an article? And the guy said, nah, blah, blah, blah. And his response was, and I won't name him because I don't want to, this is a personal conversation that we had, but he said, look, the article has already gone through peer review, right? It was peer reviewed, and so I said, well, look, I'm not going to let this go. I can't. And so I immediately, Janice, who is this leader of this group, has organized a bunch of us who are scientists who are interested in this issue. I emailed a bunch of them and said, look, I'm going to write a commentary about this and reveal what's going on in this article. How many of you will sign on, right, with me? And within 12 hours, I had like 9 other people who said, yes, let's do this. And so we went through and we identified, and it turned out that of the quotes in the article, fully 25% of them were produced with either FC or RPM, and it had not been acknowledged. And so we did write a commentary. Yeah, these are the famous users that were in the article. So Ido Kedar has allegedly written 2 or 3 books, but with an RPM letterboard that his mother holds, right? And then these others are FC users. So 25% of the quotes in the article that were used. Now they didn't only use quotes to support their arguments. There were logical arguments and other evidence that they used, but they did use the quotes to sort of back up the points they were making. And these are obviously false. This is like imagine data where 25% of it is unreliable, right? And yet you're using it in the study. So we wrote our commentary. And it came out, and I don't know if you recognize any of those names, but Howard Shane, the doctor who did the little flipping test in the video, is one of them. He's one of this group of us that is working to get rid of facilitated communication. Now, unfortunately, the interesting thing is that there were, I think, 32 commentaries. So this is a huge thing. Like the whole bundle of articles is like 70 pages long or something, or 80. But so they had the target article, they had 32 commentaries, and then they had their response to it, right? And none of the other commentaries mentioned this issue. Right, we were the only ones. They were all very positive about the article. They liked the article and so forth. And so it's a mystery to me how it got through peer review with this in it. So so anyway, I am going to write an article for Skeptical Inquirer about, as soon as I get home, actually, about this, because this article just came out. Our article came out just before I came here, and I'm not over it yet. You know, this was a bad thing. For me, it raises questions about the peer review process. There are some journals. When you think about it, this is a very general psychology journal, and there are some journals where when you submit your paper, you're also asked to submit potential reviewers for your paper. And if that was true, I don't know that that was true. I'm going to ask the editor that question and see if he'll answer it. But if that was true in this article, that would be a possible explanation for why, because there is obviously a sympathetic group that would not bring this up. And when they responded to us, right? They titled the little section of their reply about our commentary. They titled it, "Should certain voices be excluded?" Should certain autistic voices be excluded? And you know, so it just assumes that is their voices. And the fact of the matter is, they have been excluded, right? They have not, you know, taken their voices. They've substituted their voices for these people. So anyway, so I can wrap up this section, and maybe we should take a break. But the problem is, you know, that we have committed parents, and as I said, I believe that the first author of this article has an autistic child, and I know that he works with a center that uses RPM, so he has a connection to this whole world. And so the growing civil rights movement, general spread of misinformation, and there is no cure, right? If we had a pill, right? This is, by the way, the Association for Behavior Analysis International, their biggest worry, because 80–90% of their membership are people who work with autism now, because it's become such an industry. Their biggest worry is that someday there will be a pill. I mean, they wouldn't be opposed to it, right? If there was a pill that cured autism, we'd all want it, right? It would be great. But it would devastate that organization. And so, but nonetheless, this is the problem. This is where we are, that we have this gap. We have an onerous treatment, and we have the great expectations of parents who have autistic children. So it's a challenge. We're working on it, but it's difficult. I'm actually in conversation right now with a woman online who is working very hard to support FC, and she is the parent of a FC user. And so she seems like a sensible person, so I'm going to try to have a interaction with her and see what happens. But you know, it's good. It's obviously a difficult problem. So, okay. So perhaps let's see if I'm. Okay. So maybe this would be a good time to take a little break, and then I'm going to move on to clinical psychology in general and so on. Oh, did you report this for me?
Saw that even the mouse works over there. Okay, so this also works. So you can have two of them there, and if you have a problem, I can run here.
Okay. That's good. This mouse might be here. Behavioral psychologists like mice and rats and things. So, okay, let's see what we have next. Everybody ready? Back, refreshed? Oh, that was the wrong thing. Okay, that went the wrong direction. Not. Okay, let's try this. Okay, this is working. Okay. Okay, so this is still connected with what I was talking about before, and it actually is consistent with some of our discussion about how do we break through this strong pull of facilitated communication. And first of all is to acknowledge it and recognize and be compassionate towards the people you're talking to. It's the Ben Franklin on mesmerism. Ben Franklin, of course, is an American, was involved in the founding of the country and writing the Constitution and so forth. But he was in Paris when Mesmer was doing his mesmerism, right? And he was actually put to, there was an investigation of Mesmer that was done because he was doing this weird animal magnetism stuff. And so Ben Franklin was on the committee that investigated Mesmer. And they actually did some kind of cool little simple experiments that helped them to decide that basically whatever was going on was happening in the imagination of the patient, right? That it was a placebo kind of thing, and that was it. But interestingly, Ben Franklin said, "But I'm not sure that's enough reason to say he shouldn't do it." Right? In other words, he was sort of suggesting that there's nothing no harm here. Patients seem to feel like they're better. I mean, this is an argument that could be applied to homeopathy, to any number of things. So I don't know that we should adopt that with respect to facilitated communication, but it's an interesting point. And so, there are people like me and others who are working to promote evidence-based treatments, scientific treatments, and to combat this. Let's see if I can make this work. Okay. Yes. So how about some success stories, something happy? So one of the things is this. This is Susan Gerbic, who is a close friend of Natalia and Carlos's and mine, who works on updating Wikipedia pages. Wikipedia has become this enormous resource. I don't know about you, but whenever I find something I don't know about, I immediately go to Wikipedia, and usually I learn a lot from it. But she works with the Skeptics Organization in the United States, and she has a whole cadre of people that work with her updating Wikipedia pages with scientific information, not pseudoscience, and keeping that straight. One of the things that she was able to do was to take this guy Tito. Is a facilitated communication user, actually is rapid prompting method user. His mother is the person who invented rapid prompting. And he had his own Wikipedia page relying on things that he had, quote, written, right? And this actually didn't have that much to do with Susan in particular, but a discussion started on Wikipedia. It became clear that there was some question about the authenticity of what he had written, and the page was deleted from the Wikipedia, which is progress, right? So just keeping the good information on Wikipedia is a good thing. So let's see if we have any other. Oh yes. So this group that Janice Boynton has put together, and Susan is part of that as well. Susan Gerbic has had some success, some minor successes in sort of lowering the status of facilitated communication. So it is the case that in the past, primarily, a number of universities in the United States were sponsoring workshops or conferences in which facilitated communication was involved or was taught. And so we recognize that the universities were vulnerable in that situation. They don't want to be associated, they're universities, and in some cases they're publicly funded by taxpayers, and so they don't want to be associated with pseudoscience, right? So in the case, Syracuse University is the home of facilitated communication. Douglas Bicklin, who is the main proponent of FC in the United States, is a faculty member there. There's no way we're going to get them to get rid of it. It's too entrenched there, unfortunately. But the University of New Hampshire had a summer workshop where they used to teach it. And we wrote letters. Many people signed the letters, wrote to the administration of the university and said, do you realize that this is pseudoscience and that you are, in some sense, sponsoring this unsupported therapy? As they all do, they assigned a committee to look at it. And finally, they came to the conclusion that we're no longer going to sponsor this conference. So now the conference just moved to a hotel, somewhere else nearby. But we got a university to no longer give its authority to this technique. And so that was one success. It was actually Northern Iowa was the one where that was the case. And the University of New Hampshire also had some training in FC, and it actually, I think, an article that I wrote about that in Skeptical Inquirer, as well as other people's complaints about it, got them to get rid of it as well. So 2 universities now that we know of have gotten rid of their facilitated communication. So tiny victories, but victories nonetheless. So, okay. Yeah, and we were in the process of giving trouble to the University of Northern Iowa for their thing. We contacted the local newspaper, and they were kind enough to write articles about it, which made it all the more important for the university to do what they did. So it was good. Okay. Whoop. I think I've done something wrong here. Oh, yes. So, and as I said before, we've got these 19 professional organizations who've made statements against FC, one against RPM. And there are, as I'm told, there are other organizations throughout the world. There's one in Australia that's working on a new statement and so forth. So, so more of that is likely to happen. But of course, we have problems still, lots to do to try to prevent this. RPM, as I said, they've avoided any testing deliberately, and so we're going to have to keep working on it. Yes, no one likes to be told they're stupid, and that is the problem, right? We have to say something else, not that. This is how superstitious behavior begins. Okay. Yes, you. I'll click at you and then. Okay. So yes, this relates to what we were talking about at the break. This is an article that was written in a public health journal in which you're trying to figure out ways to talk to anti-vaxxers to get them to you know, or to people who are on the fence. And there's some really good ideas here in this article. He talks about being empathetic, you know, relate to the people as much as you can, and not to bother with people who are committed to being anti-vaxxers. Go for the people in the middle who might be wavering, who are not sure, and try to talk to them. And also understand social networks, the social groups. Like, for example, one of the things that's going on in the US right now is that there's a very tight Orthodox Jewish community in New York that has, for whatever reasons, latched on to the anti-vax movement. And so they are not vaccinating their children, and they have many children, and there is a you know, outbreaks of measles and so on that have happened as a result. So in order to try to talk to this group, of course, what they've done is to recruit Jewish doctors, maybe even some from that same community, to try to speak to them about it and so on. So they use members of the same group as opposed to coming in from the outside, and that can be helpful. So anyway, we need more ideas like this, I think, as to how to do this sort of thing. I'm clicking at you now. Okay. Oh. So this is also an idea that that was sort of relates to discussions at the break. Shannon Kaye, this is, by the way, this is the book from which my article about where do fads come from. That's the cover of that book, the most recent edition of it. And Shannon Kaye was a former student of mine. She was a master's student, and she had already become a very effective therapist working with autistic kids, and while she was in graduate school, she was working privately with various families and so forth. She's a very talented therapist, and she now has a private practice in Massachusetts. But she talked to me. I got her to write a chapter for this book. It wasn't, I didn't edit the book, but I heard about her work, and I talked to the editors, and they said, yes, have her write a chapter. And so what had happened was that as a private therapist working with ABA, you know, applied behavior analysis, a very, very accepted therapy for autistic children, she found that once she first approached a family, sometimes they had already started using some fad therapy, right? The prism glasses was one of them, right? And sensory integration therapy, right? So what she did, you know, they were saying, like, this is working. I know that you're coming to help us too, but this is working. And she said, but yeah, it's going to interfere with what I want to do. So, you know, but her approach was this. She said, okay, it's working. Let's do a test. Let's do a little experiment. We'll alternate between my treatment and the treatment you're doing, collect some data. She taught them how to collect data, right? And so it became a little collaboration between her and the family. And of course, you know, the one thing you can count on is that everybody wants the child to do better, right? The parents want success, and so they often willingly became collaborators with her. And so she did little, alternating, single subject, right? The most important subject of all, the child, and alternating treatment design. And of course, the results were as they were, as I can show you when my clicker goes in there. So here's the data for one child, which she published in the chapter, and the frequency of falling out of the chair was apparently a behavior that this kid did, just falling out. And so there's a baseline. Then she used a differential reinforcement of lower rate, right? Maybe this is a schedule that some of you nerdy experimental people know, and that reduced the frequency of falling out of the chair and quite dramatically. Whereas when sensory integration was used, if anything, it went up, right? And I think I might have one more. No, I don't. Okay, sorry. Did it go too fast? Oh, you did. Okay, yeah. So this is yes. So this was prism glasses. Right, this kid was wearing prism glasses. You saw them before, right? And as a good scientist, she produced a sham control, which was pretend glasses, right? So that when they weren't using the prism glasses, she put on like some kind of other kind of glasses, so that was controlled, right? And then there was, I forget what the treatment was for this, but yes, appropriate walking. That's apparently what prism glasses are sometimes used for, is for kids who have trouble with their gait and how they walk. I'm not an expert in prism glasses or this phenomenon, but you can see that it worked. And so in case after case where she was able to do these, the parents were convinced. They gave up what they had been doing before, and they felt better about her treatment too. So whether this can be adapted in more cases, I don't know. And of course, there's no alternative to facilitated communication that's going to provide poetry, right? That's going to substitute that. So that in that case, but there may be other clinical cases where this kind of thing can be done, as long as you know what you are doing is going to work. So, okay. That was the quote first half, but it's a longer half. I think this is a shorter half now. You know the thing when children divide a cookie and they say, "I want the big half," right? Okay. Let's see what we've got. Okay. So theoretically, and now we're moving into sort of more general things about clinical psychology, and theoretically in the United States, according to the American Psychological Association, clinical psychologists are supposed to be scientist practitioners. I don't know, I assume that there's maybe I shouldn't assume, but maybe there's something similar here. I don't know. I am under the impression, however, that many of the clinical psychologists in this department are not necessarily, how shall I say this, science-based in their thinking, and so but in the United States, because of our particular background, the American Psychological Association, which is the biggest organization for clinical psychologists, does ascribe to a scientist practitioner model. The idea, and then the people who have the highest degree, PhD in clinical psychology, have to do an empirical dissertation, have to conduct empirical research, collect data, analyze it, and so forth to get their PhD. And the idea is supposed to be that training will inform their practice. They will want to do science-based things, and furthermore that research, it would feed back, that problems that develop in the clinical world will inspire research to try to solve those problems, right? Supposedly, right? Click. However, it's not always the way you want it to be. Therapists do promote non-evidence-based procedures. There are a lot of, it turns out, and I'm not a clinical psychologist, I'm looking in from the outside, but a lot of them use what are called complementary or alternative medicine techniques. In addition, they may be using science-based things, but they're using these unsupported, unscientific techniques as well. And so there's that, and then there's also the same problem that I mentioned with Shannon Kaye, the idea that that clients come with ideas about pseudoscience to your practice, which you then have, the therapist has an difficult problem to deal with, an ethical issue. Do I confront the client about these beliefs and this thing, or do I sort of push it aside? I'd be interested to hear from any of the clinical psychologists in the room who have confronted this. But okay, so I'm going to go on this CAM thing for a moment here. I did write an article about this a while back for Skeptical Inquirer, and so there have been some surveys, this one done in 2015 with 193 practicing clinical psychologists in US, UK, Australia, and New Zealand, all English speaking, of course, and 99.6% of them had at some time used what would be considered a complementary or alternative medicine technique. Now, I want to point out there are a couple of in there that in the definition that they used, the researchers used. For example, they used prayer as an example of a CAM. So there's probably some praying going on in the therapy room, or at least being recommended, that would push that number up. Not an evidence-based technique, by the way, prayer. Okay, and then the other number is very shocking too. 64% had actually gotten formal training in something that doesn't work, right? But they're good at it. Okay, so here's a list of some of the things. This is drawn directly from my article, but some of the things that they found. It's a long list. Deep breathing exercises to me is, I wouldn't, it's probably effective for some things, a little bit, but Reiki and, a lot of Chinese traditional medicine, yoga, and so on. There's some, certainly there are some things that are worse than others in this list. Not everything is something that I would worry a lot about, but it is interesting that so many things are being used by physicians. So, okay, click away. Yes, characteristics. Hey, let's hear it for New Zealand, right? I'm liking New Zealand these days. I like that new prime minister they have. But the therapists who use CAMs are more likely to be women than men. It is true that, there are probably good social reasons why this is the case, but in terms of superstition and belief in the paranormal, women are more likely to believe. Although I always point out that when it comes to Bigfoot and UFOs, men are a little bit more likely to go in that direction for reasons that I don't really follow. But okay, click. So these practices create an ethical problem. They should, I think, create an ethical problem for anybody who is using the scientist practitioner model. And people have gone on from the scientist practitioner model to be even more stringent and to promote evidence-based techniques, which is supposed to be a stronger sort of idea, and also science. The science-based, there's a lot of evidence that's not very strong evidence, right? And so science-based is supposed to suggest experimental, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here. Let's see. So here's a really upsetting thing. As I was doing research for this article, as I say, not everyone agrees. This is an article published in Professional Psychology Research and Practice, which is a journal published by the American Psychological Association, right? The people who have the scientist-practitioner model, right? And so this article is actually promoting the use of complementary and alternative medicine techniques. They said, you know, a vision for the future of how we can do more of this sort of thing, right? So there's something wrong about this. This shouldn't be happening. And not only that, they make it an ethical issue. They say, accordingly, to fulfill this ethical obligation, each psychologist will want to include discussion of reasonably available treatment options. For many presenting problems, this discussion should include various CAM modalities whose use for particular difficulties is supported by the relevant scientific literature. So they claim that there's scientific literature to support the use of CAMs. Well, not so fast. And by the way, this is, you know, even more disturbing. Some of the same authors of that article have published an entire book on this project, published by the American Psychological Association. I mean, this is like, it drives me crazy that they let this happen. So you see, that's me being crazy there with the, so, yeah, I'm sure it does, yeah. Okay, next, please. Okay, so what is nice is that, you know, like my angry reaction that Saturday night when I saw the email come through, there, you know, some people got going and published an evaluation of the techniques that was in that previous article, and they published it in the same journal. Okay, so but the interesting thing is that they came to a very different conclusion. And I think the next slide will show what. First of all, what they laid out. Sort of a hierarchy. This looks like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, doesn't it? Anything that has a pyramid shape looks like that. But this is actually they put together sort of a hierarchy of evidence, right? Of what should be the evidence that we use to evaluate anything, but these therapies in particular. And there you can see them. What's interesting for behavior analysts is that single case experimental designs are fairly low on the hierarchy, even though they're very much part of behavior analysis. But at the top, you have random control trials, right? Which of course those are very rigorous. And then meta-analyses, basically summaries of many random controlled trials. So those were the top of the evidence heap. Okay, so next, please. So what they did was to take the review that had previously been done by the believers in CAMS, and they took out the ones that seemed to be the strongest according, had the most evidence according to them, and they applied that pyramid to them, and so these were the ones that they looked at, and so acupuncture for depression, aromatherapy. Aromatherapy seems to be very popular. Anxiety, and then down below, menstrual cramps, agitation in dementia, and so on. So these were treatments that had been identified by the previous researchers in that study. But these people applied that more stringent, pyramid to it. And what they found was that in all 10 cases, I should explain, this ceteris paribus thing is a fancy Latin phrase which means other things that being the same. In other words, the idea that there was a really good control group, right? That the only thing different between the control group and the experimental group was the treatment itself, right? And to them that was a bottom line to make a good random control trial, right? So what they found was that in all 10 cases, either that was not present, there was not a good control group, or the results were negative. There was one present, but the results showed no effect. So they were pretty, based on the literature that existed, the same literature that the previous people used as a justification, right, for this technique, they found no evidence to support. From a science-based perspective, The highest quality empirical studies, RCTs, cited by Barnett and Shale as evidence for CAM's efficacy, in fact, support the opposite conclusion, right? That CAMs either have not been properly evaluated or simply do not work better than placebos. So, but we know that won't stop it, right? That debunking doesn't necessarily end it. So let's see what's next. So what explains the attraction for therapists? Well, I mean, I'm just speculating here, and I would like to hear from you if you have ideas. But you know, again, standard treatments don't always yield you know, full effects, completely get rid of the problem. They may help, but not completely eradicate it. And so why not add in a little something else, right? Some sort of complementary treatment. Again, some of them sort of have a rationale that can be explained to the person and may convince them that it works. And I also think that this whole area that I've been talking about today, in some cases there may be financial incentives, especially when you think about the therapies promoted by a professional group, right, like the nurses or the occupational therapists. There is a professional or profitable aspect to them that may keep them going. So, okay, so one of the things that I was asked to write about recently was this topic. You know, and this is more about, not so much about therapies being promoted by the therapist or the psychologist, but more the issue of what are you going to do when someone comes to you and they have pseudoscientific ideas of their own. And so here I came up with 4 options that are, and again, I would really be interested in hearing what people think about this. But 4 options. One is you can adopt the thing that the person comes to you with, right, as your own, even though it's not scientific. I don't know whether that's a good idea or not. You can avoid it. You can say nothing and go about your work, right? You can try to reason with the person, and then based on the Shannon Kaye experiment, I proposed the possibility, in some cases, of collaborating to look at both things together with the individual. So let's click. As far as, I seem to have skipped over the first 2, which is adopting and avoiding. I think that obviously adopting would be wrong, right? If you were to support in some way something that's not scientific, that is an ethical problem. This was written for behavior therapists. This was in a newsletter for people who were scientifically minded therapists, behavior analysts, and cognitive behavior therapists. So for them, not promoting something that's not scientific, that's not based in evidence, would be an ethical violation, right? So adopting would be wrong. Maybe you could avoid in some cases and not bring it up if it doesn't interfere, right? But it might actually interfere with your therapy. And then furthermore, they might ask your opinion, in which case you're forced to give it, right? Ethically, you would have to say, no, there's no evidence to support this. It's not a scientific treatment, and I can't endorse it. You know, you might be able to live with it, but you can't endorse it. But in terms of reasoning with clients, let's say that it's an interference with what you're trying to do. It's not helping you achieve your goals with the client. Then you would, some of the things that are recommended, and there is some literature now. We were talking about this at the break. There is some literature about how best, and it's this new line of research has been motivated by the political climate where no one can talk to each other anymore, right? That we have just such a divide. And so one of the things that is suggested is that you do not ever mention anything positive about the pseudoscientific treatment, because that's what they will hear, right? And not what you're saying. You can't just knock down, I mentioned this at the break, you can't just knock down the pseudoscientific approach. You have to immediately substitute something else. If you leave a void, they're just going to rush back in to fill it with their prior beliefs. And then the other recommendations that people give are to keep it very simple if you can. I think back to our conversation about a broken leg, right? Everyone understands what's going on there. It's very simple, right? And if we could just have things in our realm that were like that, we'd be in good shape. So keep your explanation simple, and just from a teaching and visualization point of view, they suggest that the use of videos, if you can do it, is very effective. It's quite memorable and might be clearer than a conversation without visuals. So those are some suggestions. Yes, and so this is about the collaborating part. Now, in Shannon's case, she knew she had a powerful weapon, right? She's a behavior analyst. She'd been working with children for a long time. She knew how to help them with her product. And the question is whether in the clinical domain, and there's some clinical psychologists here, I'd be interested to hear what they think about this, but there may be instances in which it's not as easy to do, where, I mean, with children, you have the parents on your side, the parents endorse this experiment, and they're part of the process. Whether you can do that with a client, and say, well, why don't we try what you're doing for a little while, then we'll try what I'm doing, see what, blah, blah, blah. I'm not sure how practical that is, but it might be possible. And it at least is an approach that is not as confrontational. It's like, look, we both are interested in your progress, and we want to do what's best for you. The only problem, of course, is the case where the pseudoscientific thing might actually work better, for whatever reason. It shouldn't. But in the world of sort of messy clinical circumstances where you're trusting the client for the data and that sort of thing, it might be difficult to do. So as I say, there's a risk in this case, which wasn't true for Shannon and her work with autistic children. There's a risk that the data might not come out the way you want it to, and then what do you do then, right? Then in that case, it's a real ethical dilemma, right? Because you can't do something that goes against your training and so on. So let's see what else we have. Okay, yes. This is also, I think, something that needs to be done a lot more. I know that experts have been attacked lately. We've talked about that in this environment, there is a skepticism about people who have special knowledge. But I really think that part of the job of the clinical psychologist now, as well as medical professional and others, needs to be public facing, right? Needs to be in your community, your little town, wherever you live, that you should sign up at the library to give a talk on your specialty area. I think everybody should do that. And the only way that we're going to combat this sort of word of mouth pseudoscience that is out there is if there are more visible representations of scientific treatments. And this is a thing that anyone can do if they have the motivation and interest in doing it. I'm sure that many local groups would sponsor people to speak on a topic, and invite you to be a part of a panel or whatever. But I really think that this is an important. Obviously, the skeptics group is very much aimed at that. Science communication has become a much bigger thing. But every professional can do this, in my view, in some small way, and it would help. I think it would help a lot. So I'm making a plea to you all to do that. So that's that. What else? That's it. I'm done. Let's wait. I would like to hear any reactions that you all have to what I said about these issues with clinical, because I know there's some clinical psychologists in the audience. Do you have any thoughts? Yes.
I'm a clinical psychologist. I have practice. And
can we give him the microphone? Thank you.
And is it on? Obrigado. And a couple of months ago, I got this patient, he came to me with an OCD
Yes.
problem, you know, obsessive compulsive disorder.
Right.
And he was a Christian, a believer, how can I say, an evangelical.
Yes, that's right,
approach. And
evangelical.
He had this current thought that he had that was disturbing. It was like, Jesus gay. and this
Jesus
idea,
gay.
Yes, Jesus and gay.
Yeah.
These two words. And this was interpreted from him as an evidence that he was not saved, that he was doomed
Yeah,
to hell.
yeah.
You know? And because he couldn't get rid of it, it was an evidence all the time. Every time that the thought came, he was like saying. So what was his treatment? He was praying every day. Like, God, take this thought out.
Yes.
I can't live with that. But that only reinforces it.
Yes.
So I had quite of a challenge to reason with him and to propose that he should maybe try to, just accept it accept the thought, because that's the treatment on cognitive behavioral therapy. He should be okay with it for a while and see what happens. But this idea was totally controversial for him.
Yes.
So it was quite of a challenge. I had to explore the idea of contemplation on Christianity. I had to explore the differences between his theology and other theologies, on different churches, on different branches, to reason with him. And once we passed that, the treatment was a success.
Wow.
But it was a hard time to.
Yeah, so you did have to sort of break down that system of belief, a large system of belief that kept that thing going, and that's an interesting challenge. And but congratulations! It sounds like you worked it out, but it also sounds as though I'm sure that you couldn't just say, hey, this is crazy. You couldn't just confront him. You had to sort of say, well, let's reason together, right?
It would be a confirmation to him that he was like being chased by the devil,
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, well, that's great. Any other thoughts about anybody else encounter these kinds of things? No? Yes. Yeah.
If you can consider or speak a little bit for us about the movie, I think it's My Big Greek Marriage. It's about, I don't know if you watched it.
I have not seen it. I'm familiar with it, but I have not seen it. I heard it was very funny.
Yeah, what happened is that there is this person, Anglo-Saxon, that falls in love with a Greek lady from a very traditional Greek family. And what happens, one part that's very funny in the movie is that everything that happens, if you hit your elbow, if you just get a bruise, or if you are, the lady's father put Windex.
Really?
It's really convincing that no, put Windex.
I see.
We've discussed a lot about some methods that they try to be explained by pseudoscience.
Yes.
But putting Windex in a bruise is really stupid.
Yeah.
So if you can consider talking to us about those stupid superstitions, if you have something.
Well, I mean, in the case of superstitions, I mean, this is not in a clinical setting, right? I mean, if you had a client who came to you and said, I really need to do this Windex thing to help my problem, it's really helping me, right? Then we'd have a different kind of conversation. It would be difficult. In the case of superstitions, it's a superstition. It's an irrational belief, and we can laugh at it, but I don't think any other individual has anything they can do but say, look, I don't believe this, and superstitions are going to persist, right? The best we can do is to explain to people, as I have tried to do in my books and other things, how you acquired this, why, some psychological reasons for why you might have this belief and do this silly thing, right? And even that may not stop it, as is true in so many of these cases I talked about today, but it may help, and it may help others avoid Windex and other things. But I think that's the way we have to do it. I think that's it. There are much more serious kinds of superstition and irrational beliefs. Some of them are the ones we've talked about here, that we have to do more than just look the other way. I think we have to try to work to eliminate them, and the problem is how to do that. But most of the time, everyday superstitions are not, a concern, and it's in some there's some evidence that there may be some evidence that there's at least a psychological benefit to some superstitions, that they have they reduce anxiety or in certain circumstances, but so I would prefer people reduce their anxieties in other ways, but that's that. Okay, yes.
I actually only have a question whether there's like an explanation where such essential routines come from.
I'm sorry, I missed that part.
Where essential routines, like in the imagination of people, come from. For example, like I'm completely off topic.
That's okay. We can handle it.
I'm a climber, and friends of mine, they like me too. We all have very special routines before entering a project.
Right.
And it becomes crucial for the game.
Exactly.
For example, a friend of mine, before we start a hard thing, he always tries to put on first of all the left climbing shoe. And if he missed that step, he can't wait for half an hour to try it again because he won't be able to go through. But I don't understand where it comes from, but it's very important.
Yes. It's very common. I can give you my thoughts on that. But I'm curious, like, what would happen if you went climbing and you didn't do your routine? What?
If I would climb, then like a hard project, I definitely don't feel that focused.
You wouldn't feel as focused on your and would that make you anxious or worry or?
No, it only comes to meaning if it's like on your limits.
I see. So to do better, yeah. So I mean, it is the case that that many athletes, and this is a great example. I had not heard of this one before, but many athletes have a routine that they go through prior to a contest, and it's really important to them. And there are some that are so amazingly elaborate; they go on for hours, but in many cases, especially I would say if you're a professional athlete and or high up in whatever sport, the contest is an anxious event, and the hours prior to the contest you can't do anything else really to prepare, right? To make sure that you're going to do well because it's too late to practice or whatever. And so you have to fill that time somehow. And so many people adopt a routine, and they may even give that routine sort of magical aspects to it. And there actually is a recent study. This is one of the few cases where there's some evidence that those prior to performance routines actually improve performance. And this is a study done by Brooks and Ryze and a couple of other people that recently done, in which and this I've always enjoyed talking about this because it's so horrifying to me. They brought people into the laboratory who did not realize until they got there that what they were going to be asked to do for this research was to sing a song, the song "Don't Stop Believin'" by Journey, in a karaoke machine in front of an audience, right? so that was their sort of creating anxiety. And then another group, and I don't know which you would prefer, but another group was brought into the lab and was told that they were going to have to solve math problems for time, as fast as possible. Both tasks both tasks you could measure the performance. The karaoke machine apparently had a device on it that tells you how many mistakes you've made, and of course the math problems are math problems, right? So, but they had people do a little sequence of behaviors, and it was things like count from 1 to 10, and as you say each number, write the number on a piece of paper. Put some salt, when you finish, put some salt on the piece of paper, rip it up into small pieces and throw it away, right? And again, this has to be replicated. We don't know, there are lots of problems in psychology with replication. You may have heard some of that. But when they describe this sequence as just some random actions, no effect. But if they described it as a ritual, we want you to perform this ritual before they had significant improvement in, I think it was the math case in particular. So there's some, this is as close, and of course some of those routines, they did ask people, they did a survey as part of the same study, just people like about when you do something that makes you nervous, public speaking or whatever, do you do something special? And a large percentage of people said that they had some kind of a routine that they did, and a fairly substantial number of those people said that the routine had some magical aspect to it, had a superstitious aspect to it. And so the suggestion is that these routines might, and of course that would explain why they exist in the first place, is that they have an immediate psychological effect, probably making the person feel better, but they also in some cases might actually lead to better performance, as long as it's a skilled activity, right? Mountain climbing or what else. If you do a routine before spinning the roulette wheel, right? Sorry. It's not. You may feel better. It may, but it's not gonna affect the outcome.
I heard that goes as far as sending human beings into space.
Really?
Yes. I read this book of Scott Kelly, the astronaut.
Yes.
Who's
Yes.
a twin,
Mm-hmm.
and he told on his book that till this day, while going through the quarantine building
Yes.
on Kazakhstan to the launch site by bus, they stopped on the same spot that Yuri Gagarin stopped and pissed on the wheel of the bus. That's true. They
Because Yuri did that,
yes.
or what?
A woman took a sample on the little bus, yes, and threw it on the wheel, so the ritual would be complete.
Yes,
And they
exactly.
have a lot of steps
Right.
still going.
Even it's like a kind of religion in
Yes,
in
it's
the
kind of a
science world.
religion.
Yeah. My research suggests that just because you're a scientist doesn't mean you're completely immune. Scientists are less superstitious than college major varies. The humanities and artists are much more superstitious than the psychologists and the hard scientists. But there are exceptions. That's a great story. Thank you for that. So.
I just wanted to make the comment. I like the 4 ways that you proposed
Yes.
to deal with that. And I think that it's a challenge how to reason with the person.
Right.
Not only, I think when you're in a clinical setting, we are trained to show empathy
Right.
to the client. We are ready to do that when you're clinical psychologist in your clinical setting. And I think that's a challenge. Every time you have to talk about those kind of superstitions, or you have to argue about something that is completely out of your
Yes.
like discussing things that we see now, our politics nowadays.
Right.
It's a challenge. So
Yes.
I think that I really liked thinking of collaboration and reasoning. I
Yes.
think that's what you have to do, because
Right.
you cannot adopt what the person tells you.
Right.
You need to be very caution about that.
Right.
You cannot be, if you're if you don't want to lose that relation, and like the client comes, he
Right.
seeks for help, and if you antagonize him,
He won't come back.
He won't come back, and I'm not concerned about not getting paid
Right,
for
right,
his
yes.
other sessions. But the thing is, he's going to be with that problem,
Right.
and thinking of something that's may be harmful.
Right, and it doesn't reflect well on the profession as a whole, right? He's less likely to go to a person like you the next time. So there are many reasons why it's very important. And I think striking the right, I mean, you obviously did a very good job with this person, and because he didn't run away, you know, he kept coming to you. So being able to do that must be a challenge and a balance. So anyway, good. Shall we? Oh, okay.
First of all, thank you very much for
Sure.
the talk. It was
Mhm.
really very interesting. I just wanted to comment on the commentaries of my colleagues over here, because as an anthropologist, I've seen many rituals actually which people do, they need to do. All cultures, all known and documented cultures show high necessity actually to do many rituals, many different kind of rituals, and we do it also, right?
Yes.
You said that it's kind of well, these kind of small activities that we do every day, that we need to do before doing something else or after or whatever. Even going to doctors, actually, it's kind of routine or ritual. Actually, wearing these white clothes, and even right, even if you go there with headache, the doctor will look into your throat. There is no necessity for it, but it's kind of a ritual.
Yes,
for the people to fulfill their beliefs, because they are already going there with some kind of expectation, and they
Right.
believe that something will work, that
Right.
that procedure, whatever it is, would work.
Right.
So I think that what we are actually dealing with is something really deeply rooted in human nature, that people are really superstitious. They have magical thinking, that this kind of superstitious beliefs and need for rituals is a part of evolved human nature. So although I would be also very happy to see that some scientifically proven procedure, which obviously doesn't work, would disappear.
Right.
But it doesn't. It won't. And actually, right, because people need it. They
Right.
actually really
Right.
will go after it. They will search for it.
Yeah.
And even sometimes maybe they only need the attention of other people. When you showed, for example, this kind of therapeutic touch, which
Yes,
is not
right,
touching at
yes.
all. Actually, it's lots of attention.
It is,
that,
that's
that
right.
the patient gets.
Right,
and
of
so
course.
maybe the person only feels better because it got some, or he or she got some
Right.
attention, more attention that usually gets.
Yeah.
So, and it's also kind of like beautiful ritual, right? The person
Right.
is doing some
Right.
movements and some
Right.
something that nobody understands what's going on, nobody sees anything. So it is a ritual, it's an attention, it's something that people probably need, and it will probably never disappear.
Right, I agree with you completely. I think that, I mean, obviously some of the rituals, you're talking very broadly about many kinds of rituals. Some of them are part of who you are, right? They express, for this woman who's doing this is part of her profession. It's an expression of her, you know, her identity. And as far as medical rituals, and there are many in the process of going to the doctor, I would argue though that if an old treatment is used for a while and then a better one comes along, then we actually switch over pretty quickly. in most cases, unless we can't get to it, you can't get access to it. But it is true, like I'm very fascinated by the whole idea that the medical profession, for example, has its rituals, and I can tell you an interesting story. So I go, as everyone does typically, and I get an annual physical from my doctor, and he does these things. And of course, I'm pretty healthy most of the time, but he does go through all these tests, right? And I had a conversation with him once about the cardiogram or something and it's one of those moments where the doctor actually leaves the room, a nurse comes in wheels this machine in, puts it on me, does this thing, a paper comes out, and then it goes, and he comes back, you know. And I talked to him about it, and he said, yeah, well, it's really an unnecessary test. And I said, and he sort of half admitted that on the one hand, you know, the patient has a feeling that he's being thorough, he's looking at all these things, as you say, and he didn't say it out loud, but he actually admitted that it sort of justifies my payment, right? Because I'm doing all these things, even though it's an unnecessary test. And I mean, he knew I was a psychologist and a PhD, so I think he may have spoken more frankly to me than he would to someone else. It's exactly your point, that he needs to promote this sort of ritualistic aspect of the sort of mystique of being a physician, not unlike a priest, right? And from that, probably both sides benefit to some degree. It's an interesting. I'm sure there is a lot of anthropology about that out there. So. Yes, exactly. I know. No, I know. I should have been more confrontive about that. Anyway, so, well, shall we call it a day? I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. You're a wonderful audience. I'm going to Rio for a few days this weekend, and then I go back next week. For vacation? For vacation. Thank you.
Ah, ma dovremmo dare una disciplina con la aqui do da posta que é decisão escolha. E é uma discussão super legal, porque tem tudo uma questão prática, né? De como é que os alunos viessem e tal, e tem esse debate fundamental, que é fundamental.
So is that complete? They will put the name of the video. I don't know it.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
So here is for your registration within our department. We have been the foreign professor that came here as part of our internationalization course. So it's date of birth here. Mother's name here. Mother's name.
E eu acho que aqui é uma questão difícil, não dá para dizer só que as coisas são tem uma
Polarization, many persons have surnames. The only way to
eu acho que é difícil, a gente tende a achar que deficiência ela se divide pelo título, né? Pela identificação que tem. É verdade.
Yeah, I think it's the department. State, Department of State. Yeah. So should I say U.S. Department of State? Yeah.
Mas a gente se vê
States,
ótimo, ótimo. Vamos começar mais.
Where you're from?
Tá bom?
That's when this was given. Yeah, exactly.
Agora. Tá. Então, deixa eu falar. Tem que ser
Any others? Okay. We have many people, even those that were not registered, they came, and all the students registered for the course.
Wow. So these are people who watched it online?
No, they registered online and then they came. They came, so they will get their certificate.
That's great. That's great. Oh, I see.
They were received by email.
That's great. I'm glad. I'm happy.
Yeah, so much.